So you guys want to learn how I took our old army trucks and made them look like this or like that? Well, stay tuned because I dug up some old footage from the archives and I'm going to teach you how it's done. So now I'm done with my design in SolidWorks. Next I send it to the plasma table to cut out all my pieces. And the plasma table leaves a little bit of slag on the edges, so then I take a wire wheel here and knock that off. Then I'll take a flap disc and further clean up the edge so it's perfectly shiny metal and ready for a nice clean weld. Next I feed these square pieces into the press brake, and I pay very close attention to make sure my bend lines are perfectly square and my angles are also even, so that I have two perfect clamshell halves to weld together. And I'm bending these pieces so that I don't have to weld every seam, that most of them can be bends. So here's a bunch of those done. Next I start tacking all my pieces together. I have to be very careful that everything is perfectly square, because if anything is out of line, that's going to result in the adapter not being straight and your outer dual wheel is going to spin out of center and will be a rough ride going down the road and add unnecessary stress to the components. So I use this clamp to pull the pieces of the adapter together right where I want them, where it's perfectly square. Sometimes I even use a hammer. And then I also sometimes will see a fit that I need to take a grinding wheel and grind my old tacks off, and then use a clamp to readjust things and tack them a little bit better, and that makes it perfectly square. So next after that, it's just a bunch of welding. That's the most time-consuming part, and then your adapters are done. All right, here's my plan for running duals. I'm taking these original lug nuts off and replacing them with these lug stud things. I don't know the proper name for them. So those go in there. These studs have the same taper as the lug nuts, so that's what will hold the inner tire on securely. So once we have those studs in, then comes into play these massive spacers that I made. So this will sleeve over these lug stud things. From there, I have these nuts that thread on to those studs. And so that's what will hold the inner part of the spacer in. Then once my spacer is bolted in, I have this new pattern to bolt the outer dual to, which I'll just use these studs and lug nuts there. So here's the completed adapter, even finished off with some nice black powder coat. So you may have noticed in Dave's Hemet video, where he ran these and ran 16 tires on the Hemet, that we had a failure actually with these adapters. On the rear axle, both of them, these welds sheared. And I think I understand why that happened. So the day before that recovery, I was out of the shop with Dave on another recovery. And so other guys in the shop had to bolt these duals on to get the Hemet ready for the following day. But they had a lot of other things on their plate, so they weren't able to put enough time into this, and they're kind of rushed. So at the end of the recovery that we used the Hemet on, I investigated the failure, and I noticed like half of the lug nuts on the rear axle were loose, like I could just turn by hand. So it looks like they did not get fully torqued. So I think what happened was, as the tire was rotating, once you got to the bottom where you had a loose lug nut supporting it, it was able to let this face flex just a tiny bit and flex this weld. And there's multiple lug nuts that was encased on. So after so many revolutions and so many micro fatigues of the welds, that ended up just shearing them all. Because once one weld went, it kind of just unzipped the rest of them. Another thing is that I built these just to run the 5-ton at the dunes. So that's a really soft application with a soft sand. But when Dave put them on the Hemet and we took them out to the island, we were doing like legit rock crawling over sharp rocks and boulders. And that was putting them under a lot more stress, which I think if the lug nuts were fully tight, we wouldn't have had any issues even under those circumstances, because we didn't have any failures on the other axles that did have the tightened lug nuts. But I went ahead and just to be safe, I added some reinforcements to these. The first modification I did was weld on the inside with just enough space left over to still run the lug nut. And so that's on the outside face. I did that on both faces, but on the inside face, since it gets more leverage, I went on and added all these gussets as well. So that adds a ton more strength to holding the face to the rest of the body of the adapter. So I don't foresee us ever having an issue with these again. Now, one other thing you may have noticed in that Hemet video was that the front tires were close together, but the rear tires had a big gap in between them. And that further put more stress on the rear axles because the outer tire was further out and had more leverage to impose on these adapters. So the fix I did for that was I made a custom set of 4 shorties for the rear of the Hemet. And the reason this was caused was because the outer set of tires were from a different truck that had a different offset wheel. The front tires were flipped inwards, which caused the 2 duals to be sucked in really close together, which was really nice. But on the back axles, with the rims flipped outwards, it separated that outer dual even further out. So with the 4 shorties on the rear, there won't be that extra leverage working on those outer duals on the rear axles. And it'll look a lot better because there won't be that stupid gap anymore. And the front of the truck and the rear of the truck will be the same width. So that'll look a lot better and be stronger. So I hope you guys like this style of video, if more of a behind the scenes build content. I think I'll bring more videos like this to the channel, and I'll catch you in the next one.